Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be talking about both releasing and pruning the fruit trees that you might have on your properties. We'll be talking about why you want to be doing this, and we'll also be showing you guys examples of how I did it on this property. I, like many of you guys, have fruit trees, and in my case, apple trees that are spread throughout the property that I hunt on. Over the years, these apple trees have been ignored, and the surrounding trees have now outgrown the apple trees, and they're now shading out and choking out my fruit trees. So this week we set aside some time to make sure that we went back to take care of our apple trees. Now, for both releasing and pruning a fruit tree, I really like to do this work during the winter months when the tree is dormant, and there's also a few tools that you're going to need to get the job done. A few things that you might need throughout this process are a chainsaw, a handsaw, a pole saw. You might need a ladder depending on how old the tree is, pruning shears for those younger trees, and also isopropyl alcohol or ethanol. And this is to clean your pruning shears so you're not spreading disease from one tree to the other. Now, before we actually talk about the steps on how to release a tree or how to prune a tree, let's talk about why we're doing it in the first place. And hopefully the answer is fairly obvious. A lot of times these fruit trees that are back in the woods are being choked out by the surrounding trees and they're not getting adequate sunlight. Also, I think it's fairly safe to say that a lot of these fruit trees on your hunting properties haven't been pruned in quite some time. And so these fruit trees are putting out branches in directions that are counterproductive for the overall health and production of that tree. So by taking a few hours of your time to both release and prune your fruit trees, you're not only going to increase the health of your tree, but you're going to increase fruit production. Increased fruit production in my case means more apples on the ground, which means happier deer and more hunting opportunities for me and my family. So the first step, and what I'd recommend doing first before you do any pruning, is to release the fruit tree. And really what this means is you're removing any tree that might be competing with the fruit tree for either sunlight, nutrients, or blocking airflow to the fruit tree. Eliminating a majority of the competition surrounding the fruit tree is always best, but if for some reason you don't have that much time to complete the work, I would focus on the trees on the southern side of your fruit tree and also the east side of the fruit tree. Throughout the spring and the fall, that sun is going to be angled towards the south. And so if you only spend time removing the trees on the north side of the tree, your fruit tree is still going to be blocked from that southern sunlight. Also, these fruit trees really like that morning sun coming from the east as it dries off the leaves from the morning dew or potentially frost. So for the most part, releasing a fruit tree is fairly simple. We're just eliminating the competition surrounding the tree so that fruit tree can be getting full sunlight. I did mention that these fruit trees need good airflow to reach their maximum potential, and I'm going to contradict myself a little bit right here. Depending on where this fruit tree is located, I may or may not be cutting down the competition that's growing chest level and down. Anything over chest level, for the most part, I'm removing, but depending on the area, if I've got some dogwoods that are growing and they're growing up to chest height and they're kind of surrounding the apple tree, making the area thicker, I may leave those trees. For me, since I'm doing this for whitetail habitat, if I'm clearing out an area that I might potentially want these deer to be bedding in, or if I want this to be a transition area that the deer feel comfortable moving in during daylight, and I'm again removing all the cover about chest height and lower, the deer will no longer feel comfortable moving through that area during daylight. Removing the cover surrounding the trees could turn what could have been an afternoon food source location into a nighttime, more destination type food source location. And as someone who's trying to increase my hunting opportunities, that's not something that I want. I want these deer to feel comfortable moving there during daylight. So as you're most likely going to see in the videos of these released apple trees, is you're going to still see a lot of brush on the ground. Now there's probably going to be a lot of downed trees and brush piles that I will need to clean up, block up, and use for firewood, but there's also going to be a lot of shrub brush that I'm going to leave in that location so the deer feel more comfortable using that area during daylight. So hopefully that makes sense on why I'm doing what I'm doing in that particular location. If these apple trees were in more of a food plot setting, then I would remove everything that was surrounding those trees to maximize the airflow. All right, so now that you've successfully released the fruit tree, now it's time to start the pruning process. And I kind of wanted to give you guys an example of a tree that's in desperate need of pruning. This is a tree that's in my backyard, and it doesn't look like it's had any pruning done in quite some time. And this is what a lot of your trees in the woods will look like. It's just gonna be a jumbled mess of branches going every which way. So the first step in the pruning process is really just to take a step back, look at the tree, and visualize what you want this to look like in a year or two. And it really might take a few years before the process is complete because you shouldn't be removing more than 1/3 of the canopy in any given year. And this is because if you do, you could one, stress the tree out, and two, a lot of times if you cut too much, the tree is going to respond and put on way too much growth the following year. So try your best to not cut more than 1/3 of the canopy down in any given year. The overall goal of the pruning process is very similar to that of releasing the tree, and that's we want plenty of sunlight and airflow to get to the center of the tree. And so to do this, we want to promote limbs that are growing horizontally away from the tree, and we also want to promote limbs that are kind of growing at an upward angle. Again, limbs that are growing horizontally or limbs that are growing at an upward angle, those are the ones we want to keep, but we want to get to cutting now. So what are we looking for in the branches that we need to remove? The first and probably the most obvious one is we want to cut off any dead, dying, or diseased branches. Look over your tree. If you see a dead branch, cut it off. If you see a branch that looks like it's dying or diseased, again, just cut it off. If you see any suckers that are growing off the trunk, cut those off as well. And when you're cutting off these branches, cut them down all the way to the base. You don't want to be cutting them off halfway. Cut them back to the base. You can leave about a 1/4 inch just so you're giving that tree room to heal, but again, cut these limbs back to their base. The next thing you want to look for and remove are vertical and downward facing branches. These branches are limiting airflow to the center of the tree. So cut the branches that are growing straight down and cut the branches that are growing straight up. After you have those removed, look for branches that are growing inward towards the center of the tree and remove those as well. Again, we're trying to promote growth away from the tree. If you have branches that are growing inwards towards the trunk of the tree, that's not only going to limit the airflow, it's also going to limit the sunlight that's able to get in towards the center of the tree. One of the last things I'm typically looking for when I'm pruning a fruit tree are branches that are crossing over one another, and I think you can probably sense a trend here. It's because it limits airflow. So to kind of recap that really quickly, again, we want to remove any dead, dying, or diseased wood. We want to cut off any suckers that are growing from the base. We want to cut down any branches that are growing vertically or down. We also want to remove any branches that are growing inwards towards the center of the trunk, and we also want to cut any branches that are crossing over one another. A lot of times on these fruit trees, if they were pruned properly from the start, you're gonna have multiple sections of horizontal limbs. And a good rule of thumb on a tree about this age, if it was pruned appropriately, is you'll have about maybe 1.5 to 2 feet in between the horizontal limbs. And so that's why you want to be removing a lot of that stuff in between to make sure there's a lot of airflow in between each of the sections. But I'm gonna go grab a pole saw and I will leave the camera running so you guys can watch me clean up this overgrown apple tree. All right guys, that's about as much pruning as I'm gonna be doing on this tree for this year. I probably cut a little bit more than what I should have, more than 1/3 of the canopy of the tree. A lot of it was dead wood, so I kind of want to get a little bit more out of there just to give the tree a little bit more room to breathe. But as you can see on this side of the tree, left of the screen, there still is quite a lot that I need to prune out of there, but I'm gonna probably be doing that next year. See how the tree responds over the growing season, hopefully get a little bit more fruit out of it this year. But as you can see, we did open things up quite a bit. From the camera's view, you can now see a lot of open sky through the tree. If you guys do have any questions on either releasing a fruit tree or pruning a fruit tree, please leave those in the comment section below. I'll get back to those as soon as I can, and we will see you guys in the next video.